The floor is yours, Sylvester. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thanks. And it's nice to be in sort of like a conference venue virtually as well. And Gather Town is definitely quite interesting in terms of the way you interact with those that you don't normally interact with. So let me just share my slides. I think everyone can see that, yeah? So first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure for me to be here to share some of the insights in terms of the work that we have done within Play and Games, which would in a way align with the network and how we are going to interact with each other, the different types of sort of aspects that we can actually explore together. And just to introduce myself, I'm Sylvester, so I'm a professor in game science at Coventry University, and the work that I'm doing is very much around the creation and the design of experiences inspired by play and games. And also as a quick introduction in terms of where we are at the university, I'm part of the Disruptive Media Learning Lab. So the lab has been set up to work with colleagues and students across the university in trying to explore new ways for experiencing teaching and learning. And it's very much around the playful and gameful. And I'm also part of the Center for Post-Digital Cultures, where we are investigating our relationships with the digital, because the digital is very much embedded within what we do. So it is important to think about the experience that we have with technology. And in the case of EU-FairPlay network, it's about our experience and our relationships with digital games. How can we use that in terms of developing skills and knowledge, so on and so forth. So I would like to introduce one of the initiatives that is driving the work that we are doing within Play and Gameplay. I'm sure that some of you must have heard of this initiative before, but just to introduce what it is and what we do, I'm going to play a quick video so that will give some sense of the context.
We believe that everybody can play and create games. We believe in games for learning and learning through play. The GameChangers initiative is an award-winning practice-based research program focusing on the design and implementation of frugal, playful, and gameful learning experiences. As a collection of researchers, developers, and practitioners, the GameChangers community uses games and game-like solutions as a medium for expression, learning, and practice across all levels of education. Our aim is to make game creation and game literacy more culturally open and accessible to learners and educators internationally. Working with international partners, GameChangers expands and broadens its impact through a wide range of initiatives. Working with educators and learners in marginalised communities, we take a pragmatic and empathic approach to the design and implementation of playful and gameful interventions. Creative and playful spaces enable a myriad of disciplines to join forces and co-create playful and gameful pedagogies. Creativity and resilience are at the core of what we do. Over the years, our team have fostered a frugal approach to education innovation, merging playful learning with creative problem solving to deliver innovative, practical, and sustainable pedagogic practice within our projects. We embrace openness and believe everyone should be able to benefit from our efforts. To that end, we endeavour to make all our resources and research open access, complete with guides and examples to help you reuse and remix for yourself through the power of Creative Commons. So why not come and join us and become a game changer?
So what we are trying to do within this particular initiative is trying to explore how we can actually design engaging, meaningful experiences. What are the different types of experiences that you want to create? What are the benefits? What are the different types of outcomes that we would expect from it? And whether the experience will be, or the skills that you learn within that particular game-based experiences will be transferable into the real world. It is important for us to look into, games and gameplay, whether they are analog or digital or hybrid, and see what are the different types of impact that it can actually produce in our development. And also when we think about what has happened for the past 2 years, and we are still within this particular context in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, we learned that even though everyone is actually encouraged to transfer their teaching and learning onto an online platform, there is something that is missing. There is the experience, the beneficial experience that we really need to create for this type of response, because most of the time we are in the way pressured to actually deliver something online, but we don't actually stop and think, how can we encourage engagement to the content or to the actual learning activities in a more effective way? And it is important for us to really think about digital transformation in a more empathic way, the actual needs. How can we create experiences at the speed of need, of the students, at the speed of need of the educators? And these are the things that we can actually learn from play and gameplay in terms of how can we encourage the sense of ownership, the sense of autonomy, the sense of curiosity, and all sorts of different types of developmental sort of approach that we can actually include as part of the development of the experience. And as we can see, there are so many different reports, whether they are anecdotal, whether they are just news pieces, or whether they are research into the use of games during the pandemic. It's so interesting to see those who are not normally engaging with games. They have engaged with games and found that they can actually, in a way, respond to the challenges during lockdown. You can explore different spaces when you are playing your PS4, PS5, and you can also engage socially on an online platform, and you can also engage with your family members by playing, physical games such as board games. So those are the things that we really need to learn in terms of how can such engagement be able to develop skills or experiences that you would normally not get because of the restrictions or whatever circumstances that we are in. So in GameChangers, in the work that we are doing, we are trying to branch the inquiries into all sorts of different things through the many projects which are funded by the various funders from the EU Commission through to the UK government, as well as the international government, and trying to help us to explore the different aspects of play and gameplay, from analog through to digital, as well as anything in between. So this is something that is interesting in terms of how can we actually learn play and play also different ways. And what I'm going to talk about today, I would briefly touch on these aspects which we have learned throughout the different initiatives that we have run within the UK, in Europe, as well as abroad internationally, is the thinking around pedagogy, the thinking around the methodology, the ecosystem, the space, as well as the community. How can all this inform our decisions on how we can actually think about the design of game-based learning experiences in a more empathic way? So firstly, the pedagogy. When we talk about play and games, of course, there are so many different empirical studies which in a way provide evidence on how effective it is. However, there are no standard methodologies or formula that would enable us to create something that is more effective, because most of the time it is at the speed of need and is defined by the actual objectives of what teaching and learning that we want to actually explore. And we need to dig deeper into the interconnections between the different aspects in pedagogy as well as in games and gameplay in terms of game design. How can we connect it with the learning itself? And some of the work which have been done by colleagues within this particular area is very much around trying to understand more about the connection between the learning and the gaming itself. How can we explore different types of learning theories? For example, in this case, it's very much around Bloom's taxonomy, and there are so many different other theories that we can actually look at. For example, experiential learning. We're talking about active learning. We're talking about different types of approaches that would be relevant to the different types of teaching or the different types of learning that we want to conduct within a formal setting or within an informal setting. So we can start to, in a way, extract the different elements that will be relevant for the learning and see how can they be supported, or how can we link them to the different types of game design aspects, because there are so many game design aspects out there depending on the types of game you would like to explore in your design. So these are the things that we are looking at, we are continuously looking at, and there are so many different games which have been created, have been designed, which have been informed by this particular approach in making it more tangible in terms of the connection between the learning versus gaming, and how that can inform our decisions and the testing that we can actually do. And there are so many different examples. For example, this is a project that is trying to see how we can use mini games or smaller games in smaller chunks in addressing issues or topics related to cultural risk, and how we have looked at this in terms of what is the actual objective they want to achieve, what are the different types of learning approaches or learning verbs that we can actually use to help students to be able to explore the content, to explore the different types of activities, and we can think about how can this be supported by the game design aspects in this case, and how are we going to implement it. So this thought process will help us to be more rigorous in terms of our thinking of why we are using different types of game rules, why are we using different types of game look and feel, and the way that the game would, in a way, encourage different types of experiences, social experiences, so on and so forth. And also, this has been implemented in all sorts of different ways. And this is an example of an initiative that came out from the challenges that our lecturers have experienced during the pandemic, because they have to teach on Teams. It is one of the key things that the university here is in a way encouraging lecturers to actually use Teams for the teaching and learning, especially online learning during lockdown. And one thing that we thought about is how can we change or recontextualize or redesign the use of such ordinary platforms such as Teams. And we went through the same process. We think about what are the actual learning objectives in that particular subject, and what are the actual mission that we want to achieve. How can we actually look at existing play, games, or entertainments of aspects that we can actually include as part of that. So one of the key things that we explored so many different things, and in the end, we decided to create an escape room. So the escape rooms has been created and designed by looking at the interconnection between the learning mechanics itself, as well as the quote-unquote gaming mechanics that is associated to the escape rooms approach. So with this approach, it has been implemented for 2 cohorts so far, and it's going to be implemented for the next cohort, which is going to be towards the end of this year. So it's the lecturers themselves are designing this. This is such an exciting way to encourage those who are not familiar with game design or escape room design or any other designs that are going to enhance experience, to be able to critically think about the interconnection between the actual objective in the curriculum and the design of the actual solution. And the same approach has now been used in so many other initiatives. For example, it is currently being used to address sensitive topics associated with racism, as well as modern slavery. So the virtual escape rooms approach has been used in this particular approach to enable those who are not familiar with the use of games in different types of settings to be able to use ordinary platforms, for example, Teams or Zoom. So we provide open educational resources that will encourage people to create. There's so many people who are using it at the moment in recreating and adapting it according to their own needs. So it's exciting to see how they support people to think about the pedagogy behind the use of any game-based or games-related solutions that they would wish to create. And of course, this approach has been expanded to address motivation. How can we ensure, or how can we understand more about why is someone so motivated in this particular learning games? So this is something that is still ongoing in terms of trying to understand more. So this opens an opportunity for us to think about different types of aspects. What are the different interdisciplinary aspects that we can actually include in the design? So this will make it more empathic, will be closer to the actual needs of the educators as well as the learners. And this has also informed a set of mapping that is trying to understand more about how can we use playful approaches with frugal principles, meaning that it's cost effective, it is something that is going to be relevant for anyone who are lacking in resources. How can we link this with competencies? What are the different types of competencies that we wish to address? And how would these competencies develop? For example, in this case, it's all about resilience. This project is trying to see how can we use playful methodologies in developing resilience. So we are trying to understand the interconnection there. What would be our granular interpretations of these relationships? So this is something that we are currently exploring. So you can actually look at the publication which I've shared on the screen. And the second aspect is ecosystem, which I think is important when it comes to digital game-based learning or any game-based learning that you would wish to implement. So transdisciplinarity is important. It is important to understand that if you want to create something that is going to be addressing serious outcomes, we need to think about the subject matter. We need to think about what are other theories, what are other practices that would inform what we do. If we are addressing things which is, for example, one of the projects that we are doing, that we have done is actually trying to address the challenges associated to the farming sector, which is totally different, right? However, this is interesting because this is the interconnection between the subject matter within farming and playfulness, motivation, learning, and policy making. How can we interconnect all these different types of perspectives, which I find interesting? So think about transdisciplinarity in your initiative when you are thinking about digital game-based learning, to make it more empathic to the actual needs and to the actual challenge that we would wish to address. So you can have a look at this example as well. The publication is shared on the screen. So in terms of what we've done in the transdisciplinarity, in the approach of designing games, we realized it is important to encourage game making, especially those who are not familiar with games, because they are the ones who are the agents of change. They are the ones who are going to implement in the real world. For example, educators, right? We need to encourage them to be part of the co-creation team. The caveat is, it doesn't have to be perfect, because this is something that would allow them to practice and to take risk, and then to measure what they have done, and then learn from it, and then implement and incrementally improve what they've created. So this is something that I think is important in the ecosystem, that those who are going to use the actual game-based learning solutions in the real world, they are the ones who should be involved in the process. And this is an example of what we have done in Malaysia. So we work with teachers in different parts of Malaysia, including those who are at very remote areas in Malaysia. And what we found that in the beginning of the research, the initial buy-in for teachers was very much constrained by the practical and the practical constraints, and also the perceived lack of materials. When people think about game-based learning, they start to think about, okay, it's video games, digital games, mobile games. Of course, we want to encourage digital game-based learning. However, we need to start from the beginning to ensure that we reduce the barrier to co-creation, so that teachers will be more comfortable in exploring the idea of using play and games, and slowly they will, in a way, level up and then start to think and reimagine their game-based solutions in a digital way. So this is something that is interesting, and of course, the connection with the curriculum is very much important in this particular context. And they also believe that if they can, in a way, complement the actual ecosystem of teaching and learning in whatever they are doing, and that will make it more effective, they would adopt it better. So we need to really empathize with the teachers and the way that they design the lesson plans and the way that they implement it in the classroom. And these are the things that we really need to think about, the ecosystem of where game-based learning should sit and should situate. And I believe that game-based learning will not replace teaching and learning, because it is important to think about, as I said, the ecosystem, the starting point of the lessons and the end of the lessons. Where would digital game-based learning sit? So we need to think about probably briefing before the actual gameplay itself, and then self-reflection, group reflection within the particular game, and then we have a debriefing at the end. So those, this actual process is important to encourage critical thinking, to encourage social learning. People can learn from each other. The more reflections you can actually do in a group settings, that would encourage discussions on the topic that you are actually addressing in the classroom using the game. So we need to think about this ecosystem, how it is going to impact the design of the actual game. So of course, most of the time it's like, we know all this, we know that it is important, we know that we need to be more empathic, we need to reduce the barriers, but how do we actually do this? So the next aspect is all about methodology. I quite like this picture because creating games, it is an art. It is an art practice. It is an expression. It is a creation of experiences. It is emotional, the way that we connect with it. So those are the things that we need to think about when we create games, about not only the actual game itself, but the actual, as I said, ecosystem. What are the benefits? What are the impact? What are the dynamic of the learning outside of the game itself that is important for us? So one of the key things that we're looking at is very much around remixing play. Here, we want to reduce the barrier to understanding why we should create games and why we should use games in all sorts of different circumstances. So if you think about the emotional connection that we have with play and games, how can we translate the emotional connection into teaching and learning? How can we encourage people to experience that sense of enjoyment, that sense of challenge, that sense of satisfaction, that sense of ownership, autonomy, and agency, and social interaction? Those are the things that we can think about. What are the benefits of games? We ourselves are all familiar with games in all sorts of different ways, from something as simple as hide and seek, which I think is quite complex. It is a strategic game, through to something that is so complicated in terms of using something that is more hybrid, using augmented reality or virtual realities of technology that is going to enable, realistic engagement with the virtual world. So there's so many different ways that we can actually think about play and games. And of course, using games is just a fraction of what play actually is. If you think about play research, it's quite broad, it's quite huge, but games in itself is a good starting point because it helps us to understand more about what is happening when someone is playing. The rules will help us to understand more about the interconnection between the different players, the different engagement, the interaction with content, and the outcomes, the feedback loop. So those are the things that we can think about. How can we observe? How can we analyze to better understand more about the granular interpretations of the relationships between the serious outcomes, the serious activities, and also the serious fun activities that we have in play and games. And in GameChangers, we often use design thinking because most teachers these days, they'll be familiar with design thinking in about how, what do we care about in terms of empathizing? What are the things that we want to change? What are the things we want to solve? And then how can we do it? What can we do? Right? And then how can we make it work? And then think about where do we go from here? We need to test it. We need to test the solutions. We need to then improve the solutions and inform our practice. And it is an iterative process that you go through. So one thing that we encourage educators to go through is to really be creative and then exercise their creative muscle. And GameChangers have won so many different awards, and the recent one is the QS, a goal for QS Reimagine Education 2021 for the science of learning. So we are quite proud with the way that the barriers have been, in a way, reduced and perhaps removed in some examples that we have done in so many different parts of the world. And it is all about thinking like a game designer and also thinking about, thinking like a player. How would someone interact with this? So we can, in a way, try and design something that will encourage the experiences. So here is just an example of what we can look into in terms of the use of the mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics approach, trying to understand the rules, the conditions of the actions that will happen within a particular game. Okay, what are the dynamics that we would wish to explore in terms of progression, in terms of feedback loop, in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the consequences of actions within that, and in terms of the ecosystem of that particular game. As I mentioned before, the ecosystem, the pedagogical sort of approach that we can actually include within it. And then, of course, the aesthetics in terms of how would an educator as well as the learners themselves would, in a way, interact with that particular game. What are their roles? Are we going to include briefing, debriefing, self-reflection, discussions within a particular game? How does it look like? Is it going to be like a physical board game? Is it going to be like a virtual game, or whether it is going to be like a digital game? Those are the different things that we can actually think about, and think about the experience by looking at the three of these. And we try to simplify it by looking at it in a more pragmatic way. So in this case, as I said before, context, the needs, at the speed of needs, the needs, are the most important. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? What are the learning that we're trying to achieve? What are the gaps? How are we going to measure it? How are we going to assess it? Where is it going to happen? Whether in a classroom, whether they are going to use it in their own home? What are different types of activities? Do we think that it is going to be digital or physical? And how can we embed the game for design in terms of the mechanics, the aesthetics, and the narratives, the user experience design? And then we can start to think of, okay, what technology will enable this? Is it going to be analog? Is it going to be digital? Is it going to be virtual? Is it going to be hybrid? So these are the thought process that we always go through with teachers as well as learners, because we use the same process for learners to be able to design games as part of their learning. But that is another thing that we can actually talk about. So this process has been used by our educators at university with the students, with the researchers and designers. So they start to think about what are the different gaps that they wish to address. In this case, the gap was the teaching and learning of Italian in Coventry. And they were very much excited with, at that time, it was Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go was at it probably about 4 years ago, where Pokemon Go is still big now, but it was bigger then. So they think we want something location-based that we can get students to walk around Coventry and experience the story, the narratives, visiting different places, which will be twinned with a space in Rome or somewhere in Venice, somewhere in Florence, so on and so forth. And people will be able to, students will be able to solve missions, quizzes, puzzles when they go around the city. So let's start with that. And then we thought about how can we implement this? So we are lucky that we have a connection with a team in Boston, the MIT, so we decided to use the open source Tailblazer. So the lecturers and the students collaborated on this and created this application, which are now being used in Coventry City Centre, where you can actually walk around and then engage with stories and also being able to be assessed through it as well in terms of their understanding of the language and the understanding of the different responses to the missions and quests. So this is something interesting because the lecturers and the students themselves have used this model and created something that is useful. And of course, some people say that simplify it further. How can we simplify it further? Because sometimes it can get quite complex in terms of thinking about creating games. How can we create it? So one thing that we normally use is we always believe that a great idea can stem from something that already exists. In this case, we created this approach, which is just a simple approach, really, which we call remixing play. We've got the flashcards, physical flashcards. We also have the digital flashcards as well, where we use it to encourage educators and learners to exercise their creative muscles. So each time they will flashcards, they will have a topic card, and they will have a game card. So they will time themselves. You'll be surprised that some of them manage to create a game idea in less than 30 seconds, very quickly. And the more they practice, the quicker and the more confident they feel with the ideas. Because as I said here, as I said previously, the caveat is we are not striving for perfection. We are striving to better our practice. So for example, here, climate change and Jenga, how can we interconnect it? When quickly think, oh, Jenga is about when you pull things out of Jenga. Yeah, I know if you don't pull it, if you pull it in the wrong way, then the whole thing will collapse. So that can represent the actual ecosystem, our planet's ecosystem, perhaps. So you can actually include some of the different elements, for example, clean water, clean air. We can talk about forests and deforestation and whatnot. So perhaps you can get people to remove certain things that is important and see whether if you remove a few of it, it might make the planet unstable. So there could be a game that they will have to go through and they will have to reflect on it and write something about it, or perhaps do a TikTok video about it in terms of when you pull out one of the different elements, something will happen, and this represent what. So that would help students to be able to understand more about climate change, perhaps. So this is just a quick example of how this can be used. And if you are interested in this, you can actually go on the GameChangers.org. So you can see the resources that you can use for free. Everything that we create, we provide for free for anyone to reuse, to adapt, and adopt. So you can see the QR code there, so you can actually look at the link. So once they have gone through that process, they are able to then iteratively go through the full workshop in terms of, now that you have an idea, let's refine it and refine it and refine it and refine it, and then connect it. If you want to connect it to the curriculum, you want to connect it to the actual implementation in the real world, how are we going to test it, so on and so forth. So this is something that I always believe in, encouraging people to come together and and create something together, which we have done in for so many years in so many different countries, from a remote village in Borneo through to a big city in New York. So it's it's something that is useful for anyone. All of us have got this creativity that we can actually enhance. So by using this approach, different types of solutions have been created, like the escape rooms, as I said before, physical, digital escape rooms, teacher remix games, for example, board games, like very large, giant map type thing that have been created for so many different schools. Homeless Monopoly as an example of a board game, which has also been created as a giant board game, which is being used in the community, which has also won awards. Of course, location-based games, as well as card games. There are so many different examples. These are just some of the examples. There are so many different examples out there that I can share. And the next aspect is the community, as we can see previously in the methodology and the ecosystem, the people who are involved in the value chain as well as the deployment implementation, they are part of a special community who are engaging with this. So we have to make sure that everyone will be able to share with each other on how they can actually, implement something in the classroom. Best practices is important. To empathize or to be more empathic in terms of our game design and to be more ethical, we need to ensure that we include everyone in the whole process, because this is something that is important for us. So hopefully we can explore this within the network. So this is an example of, because I've mentioned GameChangers and how GameChangers, which was launched in 2015, engaged initially with our own colleagues at the university and students at the university through research and enriched learning and research enriched teaching. It has also engaged with various groups internationally, and it has informed our understanding of there is a barrier to digital game-based learning because most of the time it is led by researchers, led by designers, and often we don't give the sense of ownership to the educators themselves and the learners themselves. So in this case, we are giving the ownership back to them. It's not our creation, it's your creation, and you are the ones who are going to perfect the practice. And this has informed what we are doing in Beaconing in terms of trying to see, can we create an authoring tool that can help this with engagement with so many different schools. It is quite a shame that we can't actually, due to, as you know, in EU projects, when there are so many partners in the project, it's very difficult to, in a way, commercialize or exploit the actual platform. However, some of the partners have taken the idea and created new platforms which are being used, and some of them are openly available for educators as well. And some of the stuff we're doing inform creative culture, which is the first project we did in Asia, which has helped us to understand more about the perspectives of those in marginalized groups. And that has really strengthened our understanding of the importance of how barriers should be reduced, especially in terms of game-based learning. And which has also informed Creative Culture 4.0, where we are training more than 500 teachers. And of course, in ACES, we try to expand it into Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and try to understand more about resilience. So you can see in terms of pathway to change and impact, the community is important. They are the ones who are driving all this within all these projects, especially Creative Culture and ACES. The communities themselves, the NGOs, the teachers, the students, the local partners are the ones who are actually embracing this and ran with it, really. So this is something that is exciting, and the story doesn't stop here. There are more stuff that is happening currently that I won't have time to talk about, but it's something that is exciting, and we would wish to engage everyone within this particular network as well. And of course, teachers are the agents of change. We need to remember that they are the ones who are at the front line. They are the ones that we need to upskill. They are the ones who are, one of the most effective and direct means for achieving all the targets for the inclusive, equitable, quality education, one of the SDGs. So we need to think about how they are the ones who, the main stakeholder. Before we can mobilize young people, teachers will need to be supported in the process, because from what we have experienced in so many different initiatives, in the different inquiries, we found that teachers are so amazing, they are so inspiring, and the different types of challenges that they face, especially during the pandemic, it's so staggering, and that's sort of humbling as well in us to understand how can we help them in creating experiences without worrying about cost in terms of time, cost in terms of resources, cost in terms of all sorts of different other aspects. So this is where the frugal principles come in terms of helping them to understand more about how can we create something that is quick and easy, and is, as I said before, the caveat is not to create perfection, is to practicing it. And from practice building, you will be able to, in a way, master the process, and we can help others to create their own as well. So as an example here, in terms of the press coverage we have received in so many different countries, in terms of the way that barriers have been reduced in terms of the use in game-based learning in the classroom, and also encouraging teachers to share the best practices, the different types of games that they have created. So, we can see that the resources which are being created through this, and every single thing is provided as an open educational resource. So it is important to encourage open practice in game-based learning, digital game-based learning, or different types of formats and platforms that we can think of. So this is something we are pushing. This is something that I think we should think about as a community. How can we encourage those who are not related to game-based learning research to be able to be part of the process itself, which I think is important. And in terms of the the community itself, there are existing communities in Europe. School Education Gateway is one of it, which is part of the EU SchoolNet. So there are so many resources that have created for the teachers in Europe. So have a look. And they are also working with, I forgot now, one of the other organization in trying to understand more about game-based learning for teachers, where they are creating MOOCs for teachers as well to help them to embed teaching game-based learning in teaching and learning. So this is something that is exciting. And our resources in terms of the use of GameChangers have also been featured as part of it, especially thinking about do it yourself, in encouraging teachers to be able to do it themselves in terms of creating new resources. So it is important for us to support teachers in all sorts of different ways. Of course, there are teachers who are more sophisticated in terms of the understanding of game-based learning, so they can actually implement it easily. But we also need to think about the barriers that we can actually create as researchers. We need to think about removing that barrier, being able to have, good discussions with educators in terms of how and when and who, and why, we are using digital game-based learning in education, not just informally but formally. And the last one is space. So space is important. I think we need to encourage creative spaces, to encourage people to think more about experimentation. We have tested so many different types of spaces, as you can see on here, that people have gone through different spaces. They feel more inspired. They can see people engaging with different types of game-based learning activities. They want to create their own. So having space design is important. So think about that. Not only physical spaces, but digital as well. During the pandemic, we are not able to do things in a physical way. So collaborating with our partners internationally, we decided to create sort of like an online sort of channel for teachers to engage with very short resources that will encourage them to be able to create new frugal, playful experiences that can help them in the teaching. So think about space. This is something that we can explore further. An example here, playful spaces have been an outcome, so not just a methodology, not just a consideration or aspects, but it is also an outcome from different initiatives that we have done. For example, we have used random school buses to tour the different parts of the UK in terms of engaging high school students with the university in encouraging them to engage with game-based learning, and to reduce the barrier in terms of the interconnection between the university and the community, because there is a huge barrier. So we're trying to break this to see that university is fun. University is not just about education, it's about development, lifelong development. And you can see some of the example here, the play lab bus in Malaysia, and green playground in Vietnam, which is also an outcome where they are working with the NGOs to reuse existing resources or refuse to create playgrounds to encourage kids to be more climate aware, and also to encourage cultural development. For example, some of the minority languages in Vietnam are actually in a way promoted within this particular initiative, which is exciting. And yes, so one thing that I would hope, where I hope that I've managed to express today in terms of the thinking around the interconnection between these aspects, in terms of the pedagogy, in terms of the ecosystem, in terms of the methodology, community, and space. How would this inform our thinking, the way that we want to reduce the barrier to digital game-based learning? And how can we rethink all this and think about it within the network? And how can we engage with various stakeholders who are interested in the use of game-based methodologies in whatever they are doing? And one key thing that I can say in terms of the last thing I'm going to say is all about the experience. Think about experiences. It's not about the technology. It's not about the methods. It's all about the experience you want to create. And this experience can be created by thinking about the interconnection between pedagogy, methodology, space, community, ecosystem. So those are the things that can help us to rethink and reconceptualize digital game-based learning in a more empathic way, I believe. So with that, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure for me to share some of the stuff that we have done so far, and there are still a lot more things that we can share, but we haven't got the time for that. But hopefully within this network, we can have more conversations and dialogues around this. And you can also see one of the books that we published recently or last year, and which will encapsulate some of the stuff that I've discussed today. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really interesting, really great presentation. Now is the time for questions. Everybody that wants to ask a question can walk on one of the spotlights in the auditorium. There are these yellow spots you can walk on. And alternatively, you can also write your questions in the chat. And yeah, Katharina will then announce them. Thank you.
And if you have questions of after this event as well, you can always email me, or you can always go to gchangers.org and email us from there, or you can just private message me on Twitter, and my Twitter feed is @sarnab75, sarnab75.
So, may I start with a question? Because
yes.
I don't see a rising hand here. May I start? I'm really impressed from your presentation. It's nice examples, and I absolutely agree with you that the way to a engaging school experience or classroom experience has to do with gaming or playing, and has to do with training teachers and trainers to be game players and game designers. What I would like to know, or what often thing I often think about is what are the let's say the dark side? What is the risk? Do you see any, let's say, disadvantages or dark side of using games in a classroom? Is there something what we have to consider, what we have to keep in our eyes, or to be aware of?
I think for me, in terms of the dark side, or perhaps the drawbacks, is sometimes sometimes the schools will encourage teachers to use certain games to use in their classrooms and whatnot, or they would encourage learners to engage with games outside of the classroom. Sometimes they don't actually think about the actual ecosystem, as I mentioned before, in terms of the actual process. They don't include debriefing. They don't include group discussions. So different students will have different perspectives and interpretation or whatever content they are engaging with within the particular game. And sometimes things can be misinformed. And that is the danger of it, especially when we talk about serious topics, for example, climate change or certain things which is more political, perhaps. There's a danger that if we don't include communal discussion within the whole program, the experience will not be as powerful, because the discussions around the game experience, I find, is the most important, because that would help teachers to be able to engage with the topic together with the learners themselves. And then the learners will be able to learn from each other, will be able to discuss and debate and argue, perhaps. And that is important to encourage critical learning. So that is one of the drawbacks that I can see if we use games just to replace certain things. For example, during the pandemic, when people think that, oh, I have to teach online, so this topic, perhaps I don't have to teach it, I can just play this game. And then I just need to provide a quiz at the end and see whether they understand the topic. And sometimes, due to perhaps the lack of time or perhaps logistic issues, the discussions around that particular game-based experience is not included. And one of the other drawbacks or the dark side of it is if everyone thinks that using game-based learning is the only solution. It is not the only solution. We have to be realistic with this. Game-based learning is one of the solutions that can help develop a person in all sorts of different ways. However, the inspiration from games and play can be embedded in so many different things. Something that is entirely game-based learning, something that is not actually a game, but some of the aspects is included as part of it. For example, the sense of curiosity, the sense of the feedback loop that we give them. So something that we can learn from games that can actually solve that particular problem.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Then there are two hands.
You are muted, Katharina.
I think we got two hands, but I don't know which.
Sorry, I didn't want to speak to the whole room, only to the people that raise their hands, and call them to go to the yellow spots so that everyone can hear them. Yeah, exactly.
That is so cute, actually.
And Pratama Atmaza, if I say it correctly, I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrongly, you can unmute yourself and make a question.
Okay. First, I would like to say thank you for the presentation, Professor Arnab. It was very interesting. I have one concern, and I'm curious if you can enlighten me on it. From my experience, applying games in formal education can conflict, for the lack of better word, with the curriculum and such.
Yeah.
The teacher may be able to resolve the conflict somehow, but it seems to me that it might require significant resources. What are your thoughts about it? Have you observed it yourself? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. That is exactly something that we are exploring in, especially the one that I've just talked about in trying to reduce the barrier. And one of the barrier is very much around the connection with the formal curriculum. And that barrier has helped us to inform some of the approaches that we use in terms of the interconnection between the learning objectives and the game design aspects. And one of the key barrier that the teacher mentioned, as what you mentioned as well, is the perceived notion of the lack of resources, meaning that everyone thinks that game-based learning is all digital. So we've worked with teachers who are in very remote part of Malaysia. One thing that we help them to understand is, okay, they have to reconnect themselves with games. So we ask them to play some games. And then after they played those games, we ask them, okay, can you think of learning objectives in the curriculum that you would wish to address? What are the gaps in that particular subject? and how do you think you would wish to address it, and try and connect it with the games that you have just played. And they were so surprised that in less than 2 hours, they managed to create a prototype of a game that is addressing that specific topic linked to the curriculum and linked to the lesson plan that they have. And we went and have lunch, and in the afternoon, they invited the students to try them. And one thing that they were so impressed with was those students who would not normally engage with that particular topic in the classroom, they were the ones who were so excited. They were the ones who were very engaged with it. Sometimes the answers that they give are not correct, but they receive peer support. And that is something that they don't normally see in the classroom. So they just realized, maybe we can actually create something as simple as this for different lesson objectives. And then we use it in the classroom for that particular topic, to link it with the assessment, to link it with, to link it with the actual objective of that particular class. And that would help us to, in a way, create smaller activities which would not require a lot of resources. So when they created their prototype, they are all paper-based, and they can see how easy it is to use and reuse existing stuff. They use Lego pieces, they use different types of sticks, different types of elements as pieces, so they don't actually have to get something, or they don't have to buy anything, because the actual fact is, once they are confident in that, knowing how important it is, they will be able to invest in something which the school can actually contribute towards, especially when you think about digital games. But I think it is important at the very beginning to engage with the teachers with the co-creation of a game as an example, the example of how you can link it with the curriculum, and how you can then think about the measures and the assessment of that particular activity. And creating something in smaller chunks seem to be working based on our experience. Don't try to create a big game that's going to teach that particular subject. Create a piece of game that is going to address that specific learning objectives that you would wish to address in the classroom. And that can be built further and make it bigger. And then that would, in a way, help reduce the issue with regards to resources. I hope that makes sense.
Sorry, yeah. Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, and by the way, we've got like a group in Indonesia who is actually working with us. They are based in Umpo, University of Muhammadiyah in Solo. So they are actually working with us in this. They are engaging with teachers and NGOs in creating playful solutions. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the information.
Is there one question more from?
Yes,
there is one more question. We just need to bring the person to the right place. So
she ran away. She ran away.
Please
come to the front.
Now everyone should be able to hear you, right? Great.
Yes.
You can make your question.
Yes. So Sylvester, a great felicitation, not only for the content, but for your English. My English is so horrible. I think you can listen to it not so long.
Your English is better. Your English is good. My German is bad.
I try the best because I have a lot of experience. As you see, I'm not I'm an elder person. I'm a teacher. And 20 years ago, I was, by my husband, who was in university, I could go to Canada or USA and Sweden, to all the countries where they needed game-based learning already. And I created AKNM, Arbeitskreis Neue Medien. Since then, we are teaching our young children by games, and it's the most and perfect method to teach. We can judge it because I'm not only a teacher, but I'm a psychologist, I'm a pedagogue. But Sylvester, it's true, the teachers should be included, but you said it, they don't have the resources, they don't have enough time, and they don't know game designing. And it only will be a big progress when we will fit it together. The teachers say what they need, and the game designers have to design. Otherwise, we will take an eternity. Because, last point, when you say it's so nice when teachers practice games in their lessons. Yes, it's nice for the students to learn how to program and so on, but the quality of what is the outcome is not good enough to motivate young children. They have the quality must be convincing, otherwise it won't motivate. And our experience for 20 years, we have to combine the professions, teachers and game designers. So we need 3 years to produce our games. And there's another problem. You talked about OER, it's called in Open Educational Resources. It's the best thing that ever could happen. I would like it. But in Germany, I don't know how it is in Malaysia. In Germany, the honesty is not so good because some people create the games and others, what is it? Rubbery. They rub it. And that is not motivating those who are creating. It's a political question, not only a pedagogical question, and not only an ecological question.
Yeah.
It's okay. Thank you.
Exactly. That is such a good question, because this is the issues not only in game-based learning, these issues in all other educational methodologies as well as technologies in terms of open practice. Open practice is such a big discussions everyone is having, especially if you are working with companies who are creating games in terms of the IP, in terms of knowledge, but that is a different story. But one thing that we find which is important, that's why I focus on experience, right? From our experience, I remember when I was very much into these high fidelity games, which the quality would match normal video games and stuff. I remember that we did one project so many years ago with teachers. We were addressing sensitive issues in terms of sexual coercion. It was quite an interesting thing, and we were so excited. We want to create this. We want to make it as beautiful as possible with realistic sort of view. And then we work with teachers. We understand, and we work with the psychologists as well. And in the end, they were all saying that this is not what we want, because we don't really need the fidelity. We need something that is going to encourage students to engage in discussions. So at the end of the day, it's all about the needs. So in the end, we created something so simple. They're used in a classroom, and in so many different classrooms, the game has been used by the teachers. They were so surprised that 14, 15-year-old kids talking about their sensitive experience, which has never happened before. And they were so surprised that that particular game actually support that. And from there, we start to imagine saying that, okay, there are, depending on how you want to engage the learners. If you want to engage the learners in something that is enjoyable, something that is going to engage them, I think it doesn't have to be high fidelity. There is an example of a zero fidelity game where what you see on the screen are only grids, but because it is a multiplayer game, the context and the dynamic of that particular game was so engaging. You forget that it's just grids. So I give you this example. This game was to encourage people to do teamwork, giving instructions, understanding instructions, solving problems within a particular scenario. Imagine on the screen there are just grids. There are 4 players. One player would be the leader. So the leader, so everyone will be on their own screen and in different rooms. So they would use their headphone to talk to each other and to listen. So one player is the lead. So the lead would instruct them on where to go left, right. Oh, there's a monster there, hide, type thing. And the rest couldn't see, and the rest could only see their view. So maybe they could see where they are supposed to go, so left, right, type thing. And it was so interesting. Some of them didn't want to stop playing. It was such a simple grid game, but because of the context of use is so important, no matter how beautiful and how fantastic the game looked like, if the context of use is not clear, it is not going to be working well. But I do understand your suggestion saying that most of the stuff that the games that the teachers are created, the quality is not as good. And this sort of help us to understand that the teachers are looking at it. If they think about perfection, they're not going to get there. We can't get there. It's all about each time to better the practice, better the practice, better the practice. The teachers whom we have engaged with probably 4 or 5 years ago, they are still creating games in so many different ways with the students as well. And they find it so effective. The quality gets better each time. The first time they did it, they in a way, they question the connection with the curriculum, and they know how to do it now. So they question, how can we make it look better? How can we make it more engaging? And the next time say that, okay, we have this, students are engaged, but we want to level up. We want to use something that is more sophisticated. We don't want to use board game anymore. We want to learn how to use digital stuff. So what we do as GameChangers, we would in a way introduce game designers or developers who can actually help them to create certain things. But one thing that I always advise them is do not create something that is big. Create something that is small enough, specific enough for what you want to do, so that it will make it easier to understand, easier to create, and easier to reuse. But there is no wrong or right answer to this anyway, because there are kids in the city who might not find it interesting because it's too simple. They might want something that is more complicated.
May I just explain a last thing? Katharina, may I talk? Yeah, Sylvester, I forgot something very, very important. There are two aiming groups. I talk about students who are 5 to 7 years old. And I talk about teachers' material to explain the world to these young children by games. This is completely different what we are talking about. You are talking about students for 10, 12, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
Great. The biggest game is what you create yourself. That's no question of quality, but doing myself when when I've got a certain age.
Yeah.
But 5 years old children can't create good games, and if they do something, it's not pedagogical. We, the teachers who are teaching young people, and I really want to engage you to start early, because when early children get their attitude towards games and their quality needs toward games, so we have to give them good games, and they can't produce them themselves, but they have.
No. It's like we have not asked children, that is young children, to create games. In my experience anyway, is especially for those age, the teacher will be able to in a way work with us and then think of different ideas on how they can engage depending on what they want to learn. For example, if they want to teach language in terms of different words, so we would work with teachers in connecting that with what game design aspects is relevant and how we are going to assess that sort of thing. So the teachers are the ones who are creating those games, not the young children themselves. However, for young children, normally it's like the simple thing that we always use are Lego blocks to create certain things and recontextualize the use of Lego blocks to represent different types of words, different types of activities, different types of experience that they might have. For example, talk about your holidays. So they can actually use that sort of Lego block. But for that particular age, we have not worked with them to create games. It's the teachers who are actually creating those games together with, trying to understand more about the personality of the learners.
We create games for these young children because if they would create themselves, they would stay all day.
No, they wouldn't.
It wouldn't go. And so, you know, these teachers who are working with young children and need good games, they are no game designers. So we have to combine. We are working with game designers, and we are telling them the pedagogy, and they know how to transcript it.
Yeah, but sometimes we don't have the luxury of having game design, especially the teachers whom we are working with in very remote villages. So the barrier there has to be reduced in terms of getting to start with the knowledge of how they can be more creative in creating those games. And the fact that it has been effective, it has been evidence it's working in the classroom, and they are still practicing it. So that is a success in itself. With regards to those who are, especially in city schools, they have more resources to get designers in, doing hackathon, doing game jams, which we have done. So that is a different story. But I think in terms of empathic use of game-based learning, we need to ensure that teachers will have some sort of understanding of what's happening in the game and how they can create their own, I think.